Hello, welcome to this final episode of the 12 Myths of Christmas. Today, we're going to talk about the other visitors that came to visit the baby Jesus, and that is the wise men. We're going to see what the Bible says and does not say. And I already went over some of this in an earlier episode. So if you go back and watch my episode on the Star of Bethlehem, I talk a little bit about what the star actually was, and I cover a little bit about the wise men themselves in that episode. So there's not a whole lot more to add, but there are a few things that I'd like to be sure and bring out in this particular episode. First of all, the main thing we need to know, I'm not going to read the whole passage. It's in Matthew chapter 2, if you'd like to read it. But it talks about the wise men coming to Jerusalem, to King Herod, and King Herod asks them, or they ask King Herod, where the new king of the Jews is. And this upsets King Herod because, as far as he's concerned, he's the king of the Jews. He asks his own wise men, where the Messiah was supposed to be born. They say Bethlehem. So he tells them to go to Bethlehem, find the child, and then send news back to him. They go out, they see the star again. This time the star is in the south. And Bethlehem is about 6 miles south of Jerusalem. So they walk the 6 miles and they arrive to see the baby. Now, the main question people have about this is, when did they arrive? First of all, I want to mention, just in passing, most people know that, even in spite of what the song says, these men were not kings. You hear the song, "We Three Kings of Orient Are." They were not kings. The Greek calls them Magi, which means wise men or astrologers. These were men who studied the stars, and for their own use, they were trying to learn the scientific principles behind astronomy. But in order to make a living, they gave horoscopes and told the rulers their futures based on what the stars said. And no, that does not say that God condones reading horoscopes. God has actually told us that we are not to be looking to the stars for our future. We're not to be reading things in the signs. The horoscope charts are wrong anyway. They're based on where the stars were about 10,000 years ago. So they're completely outdated. So don't try to use this as an excuse to practice astrology. Just because the wise men did it does not mean that it's something that God agrees with. Okay. The other thing about it is we don't know exactly how many there were. Most of us, we picture 3 of them, and in the movies and all we see 3, but that's simply because they gave 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I'll try to mention a little bit more about the gifts when I get to the end of this. I did a whole talk on this. You can find the link to that in the video, or in the comments to the video on the Star of Bethlehem. And they weren't from the Orient. The Orient just means the East, and they were from the East, but not as far as China. They were from Iran, Iraq, that area, Persia or Babylonia, that type of area. And from Israel, that is East. That's when they talk about the East, that's what they're talking about. It's still a pretty good distance away. And the other thing is the races of the 3 Magi. I've seen movies. You don't see it as much as often, but if you watch, maybe the Little Drummer Boy Christmas special, or in some other versions, you'll see often them depicted as one being Caucasian, one being African, and one being Asian. And I think they just try to do that for racial inclusiveness. The truth is they were probably all more Arabic looking. They were, again, they were from Iran or Iraq, so they would have looked like, people from that area. And they were all 3 from the same region. They weren't from, or not all 3 actually, however many of them there were. They were from the same region, so they all looked alike. So there was no difference in race, most likely, between any of the wise men. But the big question that a lot of people have is, when did they come? We see them, or they're included in nativity sets. When people paint the birth of Jesus, oftentimes they'll paint the wise men as the manger. And then you've always got someone who speaks up and say, well, they weren't really at the manger. They arrived about 2 years later. And the evidence they'll give is they'll say, because it says they came to the house, and they'll say that they came to where the young child was. It doesn't say baby, it says young child. So, and also since Herod tried to kill everyone, 2 years old and younger. So Jesus must have been about 2 years old or so when they came. The truth is, we really don't know when they came, and they could possibly have been at the manger. It all comes down to how you want to interpret one particular verse in the Bible. And this is also in Luke chapter 2, where the account of the birth of Jesus is given. When you read later on in Luke chapter 2, it describes, starting in verse 21, when Jesus was 8 days old, it says, when the 8 days were completed for his circumcision, he was named Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived. So we know that Jesus was circumcised when he was 8 days old, which was Jewish law. All boys had this done on the 8th day. And then right after that it says, and when the days of their purification, according to the law of Moses, were finished, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. After a woman gave birth, she was considered unclean for 40 days, and they had to go and offer a sacrifice to make her clean again. And this would have been done 40 days after the birth of the child. So here we see them completing these two acts, one on the 8th day and then one on the 40th day. But then later on, in verse 39, it says, after describing what happened when they were at the temple, it then says, and when they had completed everything according to the law of the Lord, apparently referring to the purification rituals, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. So, if we take Luke for what it says, it seems to imply that when Mary completed her purification rituals 40 days after Jesus was born, that's when they immediately moved back to Nazareth. However, in Matthew, when we read the account of the wise men, it says that when the wise men left, they went to Egypt, and then when Herod the Great died, they came back from Egypt, and when he came back from Egypt, that's when they decided to move back to Nazareth, because he heard which one of Herod's sons was the king over Judea, where Bethlehem was, and which of his sons was the king over Galilee, where Nazareth was. And Joseph decided he'd rather live in Nazareth then, which is the town that he and Mary were originally from, where they met each other. So when did they do this? Did they do this when Jesus was 40 days old? Well, if they did, then that somehow seems to be able to leave out the account of the wise men. However, it is possible that the wise men did come to see Jesus when he was still newborn and just a few days old, and then they left, and Joseph got the dream to go to Egypt. So he got up and he left, and on the way to Egypt, there were still some Jewish cities in between Bethlehem and Egypt. The 8th day came while they were on their way to Egypt, and he had Jesus circumcised in one of these Jewish cities. They didn't have to go to the temple for that. And then they went on to Egypt. They stayed there for almost a month, and then Herod the Great died, and they came back. And as they were coming back, that's when Joseph decided he wanted to move back to Nazareth. The 40 days were up during that time, so they stopped by Jerusalem on the 40th day, had the purification rituals, and then went on to Nazareth. So if you want to have a strict reading of Luke 2:39, That seems to imply that the wise men came and saw the baby Jesus. They then went to Egypt, probably circumcised Jesus on the way there, came back, had the purification rituals on the way back, and went back up to Nazareth. So that's one possible interpretation. You can also interpret it possibly to mean that the after they completed all these things would mean 2 years after they completed all these things, although Luke doesn't say anything about that. He doesn't seem to imply that any time passed between the completion of the purification and the moving to Nazareth. So some are saying, well, but we know that the wise men weren't at the manger because it says they came to the house. Well, if you watched my video on Friday, you remember I told you that Jesus most likely was born in a house. He was not born in a stable or a cave, the way a lot of people like to picture it. He was probably born in the house of Joseph's relatives. So the wise men could have come to see the baby Jesus in the house. And secondly, they say that Matthew uses this word that means young child. Well, guess what? That's the same Greek word that Luke uses when he says baby, an infant. A baby is a young child. And the same Greek word is used there to mean young child in Matthew and to mean infant in Luke. So it's the same, it'd be like, they saw the kid. Do we mean little kid or do we mean, toddler? It could be either one. So the wise men could have come to see, a baby Jesus, and Matthew still could have said the young child, because a baby is a young child. So I'm going to leave it to you to believe what you want to believe on that. You can believe the wise men were at the manger, or you can believe that the wise men waited and came 2 years later. The Bible does not specifically say one way or the other, and there is evidence for both. Now, that does not mean that both happened, and that does not mean these are contradictory accounts. Both Matthew and Luke are describing the same incidents from different points of view, but their job was not to give details so that we can find out exactly everything that happened down to the last little, detail of it. Their job was just to tell us about how Jesus was born. So they didn't need to give us all the details. They didn't mean to give us all the details. If they had, they would have put them in. So these are not contradicting accounts, the way some people, might try to, put it. The Bible is true. Both Matthew's account is true and Luke's account is true. And they can both be interpreted to fit together. But they can also both be interpreted to fit together another way as well. It just depends on which one you want to believe. Okay, thank you for watching this series. This is the end of the 12 Myths of Christmas. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave comments in the section. Tell me how I did on it. Ask or tell me in the comments what other things you'd like to hear me talk about, what you'd like to see me do a short series on. If there's anything in the Bible that you want to hear discussed, let me know. Put it down in the comments, and I'll see if I can talk about it. I am planning after the first of the year to start a series on the book of Genesis, where we go through it verse by verse, and again, see what it says and what it doesn't say. So I'll be starting that sometime in January. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe so you can be notified when I get new videos up, and look for my Sunday school lessons every week. I post them usually on Friday or Saturday, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you.